We woke up early this morning. Our political analyst, Larry Gerston. Larry, I know probably not the phone call that you were expecting to receive on this Friday morning. Thank you so much for getting up early. I mean, we are talking about an incredible legacy lost here of Dianne Feinstein, Larry.
Well, you are, Laura. I mean, she had such a consequential career. If you think about it, go back to the early days when she was a member of the Board of Supervisors, and then she was chairwoman, I guess, the first female chairwoman of the Board of Supervisors. And that fateful day, of course, when George Moscone, then the mayor, was assassanated. I mean, the whole thing has been a roller coaster life for her from beginning to end. Her run for the Senate in 1992. Winning, of course, against an appointed incumbent, John Seymour. And you know, I think of all the things that you've discussed, the one that stands out more, and many do, is the assault weapons ban of 1994. Way ahead of its time. She fought like the Dickens to get everybody in line. It was an uphill battle, but she was so tenacious, incredibly tenacious about this. And it got in, and it was a 10-year ban. And no one was more offended than Dianne Feinstein in 2004 during the George Bush administration when that ban was not extended. He did not support it, and the Senate and the House did not go along, and that really leading piece of legislation so far ahead of everything else related to gun control, just like that was obliterated. She was a person who was very much a fighter for what she believed in. And you mentioned some of the other things she's done. The list is very long. And that's why that she had a hard time leaving. You know, so many people wanted her to leave, ready to push her out. Understandably, given how difficult it was for her to get the job done. But she felt to the very end that she needed to be where the power was so that she could do what she wanted to do for the people of California and the nation.
Larry, you know, obviously there were other women who wanted to serve, other women who ran in order to serve in public office. What was it about Dianne Feinstein that made her the one to have that staying power?
Who knows? I mean, you know, there's a thing in the personality that drives you, and some of us have it and some of us don't. Remember, she graduated from Stanford in 1955. There weren't a whole lot of people, a whole lot of women, that is to say, who were graduating from Stanford in that era. It's so hard to know, but she was definitely a driver. She really knew that the power was in places of elected offices, and that's where she was going to go to get the things done that she thought should be done. And the interesting thing was, as much as she was a moderate Democrat, she worked well with the other side. We don't hear about that anymore. We just don't. And that's another reason why people like Mitch McConnell were so unwilling to urge her to leave in that body, the Senate, because he too knew. He knew. He worked with her. You know, a person of that talent, not only in terms of the issues, but the personality to work both ways, both sides. This is rarity, and we certainly miss it these days.
Well, she worked in a time where there was actually respect, you know, amongst different politicians as well. Different era that we're talking about. And, you know, talking about all the accomplishments that she's made, I mean, I think it'll be hard to pin down like what her legacy, what she'll be most remembered for, Larry.
I think you're right. I mean, as I say, for me, it's the assault weapons ban because that issue, gun control, was big then, and of course even bigger now. And as contentious it was then, it's even more contentious now. But she found a way to claw through it. And that's hard. You know, when you cobble together legislation, people think it's simply a matter of raising your hand and say aye and nay and whatnot. No. There's a lot of cultivation. There's a lot of people you have to go to, not just your allies, but the folks on the other side. You have to work with them. They have to work with you. There has to be a lot of trust. And of course, again, these are the variables that we just don't see much of these days. But she had it for her colleagues, that kind of respect. They had it for her. And these are the kinds of subtleties that some of us don't think about in political life, yet they are vital. They're vital to the process.
Larry, she was 90 years old. She was under a considerable amount of pressure, higher because of her age and because of her health. So in the last couple of months or so, people did say that they wanted to run for her seat before she passed away. So we do have a list of the people who officially said they wanted to take over that leadership position. We have them up here on the screen, the people that you will recognize the most, of course, Barbara Lee there in the middle, and Adam Schiff, but there are several others as well. What happens now?
Well, two things. First of all, yes, those are the leaders. It's been a pretty close race at the moment between Adam Schiff and Katie Porter, both members of the House in Southern California. Barbara Lee trailing. Eric Early, of course, is a Republican. But it's still very early. It's still very early and very fluid. So that goes on. But you're right. The big story, and we don't want to step on a terrible tragedy like this, but the fact is that there will be an appointment, and the appointment will be made by Governor Newsom. Now, the same thing goes with this process as if she resigned. He will appoint somebody, and he said, of course, we all know this by now, that he will appoint a black female. And he's also not going to appoint Barbara Lee, who, of course, is a black female, because he says she's running the race. He doesn't want to tilt it. So the question is who? And if you think about it, the list has to be very small. Now, why would the list be small for a coveted position like this? Well, most people you would think would be black elected women. And very few of them are in positions where they want to give up the power they have for a position of perhaps lasting 18 months, because he wants a caretaker, okay, someone who will promise to not run once that person's elected. You get down to a very, very small number of people. Some of them are known, some of them aren't. There are possibilities that we all seek to try to get our arms around. But it's going to be interesting to see who he winds up choosing, given the limitations that he's put on himself.
So reiterate that again, Larry. So Governor Newsom wants to choose somebody who doesn't want the job permanently, but that wasn't the case with Alex Padilla.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But this is a different situation. When he appointed Alex Padilla, there was time for Padilla to run on his own, and the governor was very comfortable with that. But here you've got an election around the corner, already in place in terms of the campaigns. And so it's a very delicate time. Newsom could appoint any one of those if he wanted to. He could. But if you think about it, politically, it's not going to be good for him. Imagine if he appointed any one of those three Democrats. Well, the other two are going to be pretty unhappy, and their supporters are going to be pretty unhappy. So he's probably wise not to do that. But especially if you think about his own aspirations, which of course he denies all the time. I'm not running. I'm just an interested bystander. Well, some people think it's a little bit more about that, particularly as it comes to 2028. So he really wisely, I think many people believe, has said, I'm not going to get involved in that. But then when you look for that caretaker, it's hard to find, given the limitations he's put on himself, exactly who that woman will be. And it's going to be very interesting as we wait and see to try to read the tea leaves.
Do you think he'll stick to what he stated before of who he potentially would want to put in there, an African-American woman?
One never wants to outguess what Governor Newsom will do. Because, of course, he's known to zig in one direction and at times zag in the other. So I would be reluctant to get out on that one. But he certainly has put himself in an interesting situation by limiting the number of people who he, at this point, says he will consider. Now, maybe he'll change his mind. But remember, if he changes his mind, not only does he upset the apple cart in terms of what he's already done, but it probably is as a notch against him in terms of his credibility.
I mean, but he couldn't have anticipated what this timing would have been. I mean, he said when the time comes, and he couldn't have known how close it was going to be to that election. But yeah, you don't like to go back on your word for sure.
We'll see
Chris,
what happens.
I think he has anticipated it. Sadly, Senator Feinstein's position has been one that's very public. We've known about this for months. Governor Newsom may be a lot of things to a lot of people, but he knows what's happening when it comes to someone like Dianne Feinstein, who, by the way, he was close to as well. So, no, I think he did know what was going on. And he's got a list of some sort. He's not scrounging around at the last minute. But who is on it? Well, we'll find out. And we'll find out soon. And again, we must respect this whole occasion, so to speak.
Right.
Right? We must respect that.
Very
but
much so.
The fact is, this goes on. This goes on. And the Senate has critical votes. Remember, we've got this whole budget crisis.
Yeah.
This government shutdown. And it would behoove the governor to put somebody in that seat as soon as possible.
Right. And we've all lost loved ones where we want to grieve in that moment, but we also know that there are things that still have to happen.
And things that will happen.
Right.
But, right. We can't get away from the fact that, I mean, this is a legacy here that has passed. And
there's not a lot of sentimentality in politics. It may be unfortunate to put it that way, but there's not a lot of sentimentality because life goes on. Decisions are made, votes are taken, and you've got to have your ducks in a row. There's no question.